So let's take a look at this PowerPoint. Um, I'll go to the next slide. So here we have some etchings by Francisco Goya, who worked, well, very long time ago. These are pieces from 1799. And to the right is an etching. Now, you guys are working with ink wash, but he's getting a lot of tones with his etching here. And I want you to look at the composition. What I really want you to look at is how he's using the entire page. He's not just putting an image right there in the middle, right? That's kind of when people start working with composition, they tend to like put the one main thing right in the middle of the page and then really not pay a lot of attention to the rest of their page, right? Right here, your focal point is probably that figure, the figure that's leaning over the kind of box looking shape, because he's got the highest contrast, he's got the lightest lights, the darkest darks. That's where you want your focal point to be, but it's not right there in the middle. It's kind of off to the left hand side. You can also think about rule of thirds. I don't know if you guys have heard of rule of thirds before, but that's if you were to divide your paper horizontally in threes and vertically in threes, where those lines intersect is where you want your focal point to be. So you don't want it to be right smack dab in the middle. You want it to be a little bit off center. Even when you look at the self-portrait to the left there that Goya made, you'll notice that the face is not right in the middle. It's a little bit off center and it creates a more interesting composition. When we look at this next piece by Francisco Goya, he's using like this very classic triangle shape. So when you think of like the all the lines leading up on the left to that very top and then back down again, creates a triangle. That's a really good way to do a composition as well. And again, the focal point, that figure that's dangling, is not quite in the middle. It's a little bit off center, and a little bit higher than the very middle. When we're looking at this piece by Kara Walker, which is a contemporary artist, actually working with ink here as well, but very dramatic. She's working with a lot of themes about Black history, and this one's a little bit ambiguous. You can't quite tell what's going on, but it's very dramatic. And again, the main character to the left there is a little bit off center, and then we have the either a portrait or somebody in a window. It's hard to tell, or looking through a door maybe. And that character is kind of off center as well. So really interesting composition here and a really interesting way to work with ink as well, and kind of goes along with our theme of the telltale heart. Um, and then when we move on to student examples, this is from quite a few years ago, you'll notice different approaches by students. Same here, when they're working with composition, they're really thinking about what's happening in the foreground, the middle ground, the background, even though the one to the left, it's very kind of not very clear what's happening in the background. Maybe it's a pillow on the bed, maybe it's the floorboards, we can't quite tell, but that's okay, as long as you do consider what's happening in the background. When we look at these next two, I love the way the light is working in both of these, where they're really focusing on that door open and how that light then like affects the rest of the piece. Grace Rosenthal's piece on the right, I think, is just so lovely. The way the light is on that heart, all the details are addressed there, and the same for the left hand side. Isaiah Keller really added a lot of great details to that piece as well. And really thinks about foreground, middle ground, and background in that piece, with that door being in the foreground, and then looking kind of down, almost like a bird's eye view, looking at that bedroom. Here we have two very different approaches, one almost a portrait, and again, it's not right in the middle, which is really lovely. To the right, working with that lantern and how that light is affecting the, I guess, the interior. And for our last ones, I found these really fun approaches, um, very creative ways of looking at this. Both Brandon and Gage really went in a different direction, um, but really fun ways to interpret this, right? So it's very much up to you how you want to interpret it, but do really consider what's happening in the foreground, what's happening in the middle ground, what's happening in the background. Don't just leave it blank. And then really think about your composition. Don't just stick one main thing in the middle and call it a day. Really consider what's happening to that whole paper. I hope that helped, and let me know if you have any questions.